Welcome to the Masters of Resilience podcast. This show is an exploration of the unseen and unheard stories of adversity that shape the journeys of high performers. These conversations will help you better understand the mindset, habits, and behaviors that empower these exceptional leaders to endure the most challenging moments of their careers and emerge stronger than ever. Your hosts are Ryan Seager and Mark Phillips. Let's dive in to more.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Masters of Resilience podcast. Today, we're excited to welcome a guest whose insights have reshaped how we think about success, growth, and building lasting value. Eric Jorgenson is an author, entrepreneur, and newly appointed CEO of Scribe Media, a company redefining the way books are written and shared with the world. Eric's work embodies the power of ideas like compound interest and leverage, not just in finance, but in knowledge, relationships, and decision-making. His book, The Almanack of Naval Ravikant, has become a must-read for anyone seeking clarity on wealth and happiness, offering timeless wisdom on how to achieve outsized results in life and business. Whether you're building a business, refining your mindset, or looking to take your own growth to the next level, this conversation is packed with actionable insights and inspiration. So settle in and join us for a conversation that will help take your thinking to the next level. Eric, thanks for joining us on the Masters of Resilience podcast. We're pumped to have you. I know you and I had crossed paths at the Founders Only event a couple of months back and had the privilege of reading The Almanack of Naval Ravikant, which has been a top book of mine this year. So we're eager to have you. Would love to get your story a little bit, your journey, a little bit, how you got to Scribe and the role that you're in. So maybe share with us that story if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I mean, super quick background is like born and raised in Michigan, third generation, like small business entrepreneur family. Thought startups were super cool. So dropped out of college to move to San Francisco, joined a tech startup. So I did the like venture-backed tech startup thing for maybe 10 years as I was, blogging and tweeting led to blogging led to writing a book. And as of very recently, writing a book somewhat accidentally turned into running a publishing company. So I find myself as CEO of the publisher that I used to publish my books for a few years, which has been a really super interesting experience. But that's been about 18 months since I took that job.
That's great. And give us a little background too on how you ended up, just the story behind getting to that seat. I think that's a little unique. Most people don't know, may not know that.
A little unique, yeah. This is a wild story. Okay, so I published my book in 2020, and I did that. So Tucker Max is this like famous New York Times bestselling author, published 4 or 5 books, and he kept getting calls from his friends to, how do I write a book? How can you help me publish? And so he started this company called Scribe Media maybe 10 years ago now. And it grew and grew profitably and grew steadily. And him and his co-founder, Zach, were, they're founders. They were like ready to go do other things. It was 8 years in. So they sold the business to this guy they had hired to be the CEO. And they, went off and did different things. Tucker came out like a farmer and a rancher, and Zach went off and like is one of the foremost crypto bug hunters ever because he's brilliant, really, really interesting guy. And they both just kind of stepped back from the business. And this guy that they sold the business to, a series of like mistakes led to ethical missteps, led to allegedly like entirely fabricated financials and this whole sort of house of cards that just utterly collapsed and took everybody by surprise, including like a lending bank and investors with millions of dollars in, and authors who prepaid for work, and vendors and team members who were laid off on no notice. And it was just a catastrophic, terrible situation. That was like May 2023. And I was actually an author who got caught up in that. So I had published because of my relationship with Tucker, and I had an incredible experience with Scribe. Like, The Almanack of Naval is a beautiful book. Publishing it changed my life. I loved everybody I worked with. I thought this model is the future of publishing. And I'm publishing my second book with them and the business collapses. And I'm like, I can't, I got to fight for this thing. Like, I believe in this model. This business has given me so much. I want to see what I can do to help them out. So I started making as many phone calls as I could. And I got some friends who buy companies, long-term holding companies or private equity or whatever. And these guys, Sieva and Xavier, had a background in publishing and distress turnarounds. And so they were like, man, this is, we had heard of Scribe. I told them how great the product was, essentially, the people. And so they flew to Austin, they met the team, and they sort of surveyed the landscape. And like, I felt so bad. Every day they like found a new problem, a new piece of disaster, a new, aggrieved party. It's just like the most brutal, sort of diligence you can imagine. And it ended up being like, the business was just FUBAR. Like there was no restructuring. There was not even like a bankruptcy. Basically the bank just claimed the business and all of the assets and took the business through the bankruptcy process itself. And the thing that ended up making the most sense was they started a new company, bought the brand, and hired over some of the veteran kind of core team members, and then hired me, as it turns out, to join as CEO, because I brought them the deal. I sort of evangelized the company, told them the story of the space. I was an author who'd been an evangelist for the company. And I was like, you guys know I've never like CEO'd a company before, right? Like I can't be your first phone call. And they were like, we like your instincts. We think you should do it. We'll give you some support. We've got a portfolio and structure, and we've done this, 20 other times. We can help you sort of get the groundwork in place and all the financial infrastructure and stuff. So I was like, some long conversations with the wife, but decided we'd give it a shot. And, it's tough to tell in the short term, like, how you're doing. So the jury will be out for, I think, a few more years, but so far so good. We got the business restabilized, and the team feels good, and I think we're producing exceptional work for authors.
What's been most surprising, Eric, stepping in as CEO?
I was probably optimistic about my ability to sort of like bring a whole community along and like be able to help people emotionally through this like really traumatic event. So there's like, a lot of different, this community of like hundreds, thousands of people. And some people were like immediately and very much understanding of like, one person made a bunch of really terrible decisions and we are all dealing with it. And thanks for doing what you're doing to, get us all back on our feet. Like, that's maybe 30%. There's maybe 30% that were kind of like, screw you, screw everybody who's involved. And there's another, I don't know, maybe it's 5 or 10% who's like, it's scorched earth. You are evil. You are dead. And like, as somebody who sort of like takes pride in my, reputation and personal brand and like the perception that others have of me, like I genuinely struggled with being sort of painted with the brush of like, so closely associated with this person that made all these terrible like ethical missteps and decisions. But it's just a really tough situation where there's no perfect solutions. And that's the reality of a lot of, turnarounds and bankruptcies and stuff, I guess. But not everybody, I think I took for granted how much some people who are like in our circle probably like understand the mechanics of this and are kind of like, oh, yep, that's how it works. That's where the risk is. That's, it's a no hard feelings, tough situation. So there are a lot of kind of sleepless nights and churning stomachs along the way, but we're doing the best I can to like meet with everybody one-on-one, be really patient, talk through as much as we can. You can't, fully reach or bring everybody along or help them through, every feeling that they have, but we've done it, I think, well for dozens and hundreds of people so far, and we'll just keep at it.
That's awesome. I'd love to, maybe you can comment a little bit on Scribe's model. I think it's a little more unique, right? And I think you guys are, it's not a typical publishing deal. I know you went through the process and you do it with the authors now, taking kind of the unconventional route, which, again, probably probably more success in the long term, versus other publishing type deals you got to deal with. I'd love for you to dig in a little bit on that.
Yeah. I mean, this is really like what turned me on about Scribe in the first place, is that their model is just, I think, so visionary. Like what Tucker and Zach saw 10 years ago and where publishing was headed super resonated with me. So, to just anchor us on like the traditional publishing industry, it's like a 150-year-old business model where it was entirely dependent on having, you needed this big upfront capital to do the print run. You needed to do big print runs. You needed to physically distribute them to bookstores. You needed access to the bookstores. And you needed connections to the centralized media that was like all in New York, right? Like if you couldn't go on a talk show or get a column in the New York Times, you couldn't sell books. And if they weren't on bookshelves, you couldn't sell them. And if you couldn't print 10,000, you couldn't get good economics on them. So that's the 100-year-old version. And like, think about today, every one of those is completely flipped 180, right? Like almost all books are sold on Amazon. There's no gatekeeper there. The print on demand technology is incredible. So you don't need upfront capital to do a big print run. And people just recommend books to each other on social media, podcasts, email newsletters. Like that's where sort of the meritocracy battles out, and getting on a bestseller list or going on a talk show or whatever doesn't nearly have the same sort of like king-making impact that it used to on a book. And so from that point of view, the authors that have built their audience, de-risk their message, have an email newsletter, like they've already done the work to build the audience. They don't have to take a capital risk. And the hard expenses that go into publishing a book are actually not that much in the scheme of things, right? So you don't need a capital partner. Most people that we work with, obviously, don't. So you can just pay the hard costs that go into a book. You can retain full control creatively, financially, and all of your rights in how you use your book, which this is an underappreciated thing of any book that comes out of a traditional publisher. It's got an author's name on it, but they did not have final say on the book title, the author bio, who the narrator is, like anything about that book. They cede all creative control. And if you think about this book this book is going to be in thousands of people's hands that you'll never even meet. Their perception of you will be shaped by this book, and you're giving up control over those decisions to somebody that certainly doesn't share your business goals, but also may not even have your best interests at heart. Like there's so many stories I hear from authors who sort of convert from this traditional publishing world over to us. But that's just for people who are trying to sell a bunch of books. If you come in with a business goal of like, look, I'm trying to grow an investment fund, I'm trying to find acquisition targets, I'm trying to become a speaker, like controlling your book, your reinvestment in the book, the audience, the message, all of that. There's very few people getting rich literally just off selling books anymore. It's very much like a part of an ecosystem, and you really want to be able to control every part of that, not just how it's written, how it's positioned, how it's titled, but also how it's then used and how, you give away the free digital versions. You can give away the physical versions. You don't have to buy them from your publisher at cost. So there's all these crazy sort of just like outdated, baked into the system, like innovator's dilemma things that Scribe just breaks all of and is like, we are a professional services firm. We do all of the craft of traditional publishing. Hire us. We'll do the work. You remain the CEO of your book and the full owner. And, we work for you to create your vision at the very highest possible level. So you'll get quality of a traditional publisher with the control of self-publishing.
Well, and it speaks to one of the biggest takeaways that I've had from the Almanack, which is productizing yourself, right? At the end of the day, it gives you full control over the product, which is your own reputation. And you've spoken to that. I'm curious your experience productizing yourself, Eric. Do you think there's a certain level of risk tolerance that somebody has to have because they're putting themselves out there to be able to productize themselves and publish things on platforms like Scribe?
I think risk is, you don't necessarily have to take risk. Like you can have a very systematic approach to minimizing risk. Naval's other word is accountability, which I think is a really good one. I think accountability is a more important frame than risk. And it just depends what risk you want to bite off. Like, you have the risk of tweeting something that makes you look stupid. Is that free? Like maybe financially it's free, like reputationally it's not. You know, the risk of writing a book that's going to make you look stupid. Do you want to take the financial risk of investing, $20,000 in publishing a book that you then control the full upside of? Or do you want the risk of, taking a small advance, but losing the upside of, control and making a big money if you do the work to sell a lot of these books? We are all, I think, in the business of understanding the risk reward trade-offs that we're in. And you shouldn't take risks that you don't get compensated for.
What does accountability mean in that frame, though? What do you mean by that?
I think Naval's follow on there is like, take business risks under your own name. So the way I think of it is just being exposed to the consequences of your actions. It immediately sharpens your decision making. If you are exposed to your own feedback loop, you will make better decisions. And the shorter and clearer those feedback loops are, the better. If somebody spends 2 years in consulting in like a cushy, like consulting job, they're probably going to learn a lot less than somebody who's spend 2 years of door-to-door sales where they don't eat if they didn't sell something that day.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah. I'd love to step into the Almanack a little bit too, because I think it's been a book that's been paramount for me this year. I feel like I've had tons of pen markups and all sorts of stuff. So I'd love to maybe just...
I love seeing a beat up copy.
Yeah, exactly. Bought it for a few people, lots of pen marks, it's all good stuff. Maybe describe that process a little bit. I know it's been transformative for you, and I think there's countless things you can pull out of that. So maybe just kind of high level, what stands out as kind of the key takeaways for you in that process?
Oh man,
that's very hard to synthesize, I know, but if you had to do it.
Yeah, it's a brutal question, because I mean, like the process of writing that book, the real gift of it was like baking those ideas into my operating system, essentially, like trying to like build a clone of it all that like lives in my head and sits on my shoulders and whispers to me when I'm doing something stupid. It's really, I mean, I think the confluence of a bunch of those factors is like really important. Like the synthesis of, I think accountability is a great framing, which we talked about a little. I think leverage is an incredibly important frame that we talked about, or we could sort of go deeper on. And this is all kind of on the wealth building side, but I literally, like, after the book was published, leverage is kind of the biggest unexplored idea for me. Like, I think it's an extremely deep idea that got a couple pages in the book. And I was like, man, this is a book in itself. So I started doing a lot more like blogging and writing about it and trying to, architect my work around it. And so I did a fair amount like kind of deeper there. And now I think about my career now as just like, building compounding leverage, essentially. Like that's the game. So doing that in ways that I can. I mean, at the happiness side is an endless journey of just trying to keep that front and center and find the balance between, chasing the things that you want to chase, thoughtfully curating your desires and finding a balance between, working towards them and enjoying the present moment that you're in.
I love the double click on the compound interest topic, because I think that's something that resonated deeply with me. And I think when you're talking about, and again, I think you'd speak it from a wealth perspective, but I think you could also speak from just a brand building career standpoint too, where you can, I'm trying to build this thing that's going to be hopefully great, but there's just a time, like I got to put in the time and just that I need to let it compound, and then we're going to get somewhere hopefully where we actually want to be.
Yeah. I mean, compounding is one of the most important, I think, mental models, in part because it gives you confidence to have patience, which I think is just extremely important. Knowing when to be patient and when to be impatient is almost, if you could boil down like the secret sauce of leadership, of business building, of investing, like all of it is just, can you correctly triage patience and impatience? And this is another great Navalism, like impatience with action, patience with results. That's kind of how I see compounding. Like you can't, if you're rattling around being impatient, that like you're not, you didn't make $1 million this year, but you're only 2 years into your business or whatever. Like you're gonna drive yourself crazy. Like the sound of your own wheels is gonna drive you mad. So you need to, like, patience gives you the confidence, or compounding gives you the patience. Like compounding gives you the confidence to be patient and let the results of your work sort of manifest over time, like almost in due time. And you'll start to feel it take off, but you'll also feel the momentum build. And when you see yourself doing work that is not part of that compounding, it also gives you to sort of narrow down your effort to be like, is this work that I'm doing today right now moving? Like, is it accelerating the flywheel? Like, is it compounding on the same terms in the same lane of what I've already been doing? And Ryan, I think your career is like a great example of that. Is like, I know very few people who actually have done the exact same thing for, 2, 5, 10 years, especially in the tech world. People are like pivoting all over the place. And it's really hard to build a really strong, really compounding flywheel with really deep expertise if you don't have a ton of reps and huge momentum not just in your own brain,
word.
but in the perception of others' brains around you.
It's a good word.
Yeah. And the weird part about that concept, and maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's an athlete thing too, but even if you've been doing something for over a decade, you feel like you're, you get here and then it's just you're on to the next thing, and then you're on to the next thing. So I think it's important to have the rearview mirror to look on and understand that there has been some good success, but at the same time, it's a weird dichotomy between, okay, yeah, but we're just getting started on this thing.
Yeah, you're always focused on, that's the other thing about compounding, right? Like the next cycle is always going to be the biggest cycle yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're always excited for whatever one's next. It always feels like you're just on the cusp of like, oh, the next one's going to be real. But when you look down the mountain, you're like, oh, also I've covered a lot of shocking amount of ground.
We did some stuff.
Do the math. Yeah, dude.
That's good.
The athletics thing is a good metaphor too, because you don't see people thriving in a sport who change sports every 3 years. Like, obviously, but you see that all the time in the business world. People change like a lot about their work circumstances and just don't keep compounding on the same problem, the same space, the same, even the same idea. So, take a simple idea and take it seriously.
It's interesting. Throughout the book, Eric, early on in the book, wealth is a topic that's talked about extensively. And then towards the end, as he talks about happiness and personal growth, he talks about and Revolve talks about prioritizing health, time, relationships. And kind of this idea that wealth is almost meaningless without those three. But I'm curious if you feel like, or in the mind of Naval, defining wealth, because I think in our culture, we talk about that as monetary value, right? I have X amount of dollars in the bank. But I feel like there's got to be a way to define wealth of like, I'm on my deathbed and my spouse and my kids and my grandkids are surrounding it and they're there and they love me and they care about me, right? There's 1,000 other ways we could define wealth. How do you think about that? Is it a monetary thing? Do we need to have another definition of wealth that includes sort of like the relational components of life?
Yeah, I think they could really, like, wealth isn't a very overloaded word. It's doing a lot of work and it needs a lot of modifiers, and just to be sure that we're talking about the same thing, because you could try to redefine it constantly and never just end up in an endless argument with somebody because you don't have a set term. In the concept of building wealth as it's like laid out in the book, Naval defines it very specifically as like, it is not having money, it is having assets that earn for you while you sleep. Which is why it's about like build or buy equity in a business. Like it's about accumulating capital that you can deploy, accumulating, influence, build a team, skills that you can deploy, accumulating products like we're doing now, like externalizing the things that and making them self-serve for, thousands or millions of people. Like, give yourself a lot of opportunities, a lot of exposure to that magic. Really. There's another definition of wealth that I really like, which is David Deutsch's, and I'm always like terrified to paraphrase him because all the words are chosen so carefully. But wealth is the total set of operations you're capable of carrying out. I really like that. And I think it importantly includes, it immediately redefines to include like, what skills do you have? What knowledge do you have? What influence or, karma do you have over others, with others that are willing to show up and help you? Also, what resources do you have access to? But like, you could have all the tools in the world and you don't have the knowledge, you can't build the house. So do you have the right combination of tools, knowledge, collaborative, quality relationships in order to carry out those operations? And you can think of that individually. You can also think of it as a company. You can also think of it as our civilization. Like, our wealth has been continually expanding as we accumulate new knowledge, new things become natural resources that we didn't even know existed. Like, I'm just in love with that definition. And if you take that to the extreme, like, you can be on a desert island, and if you have no skills about how to survive on that desert island, you're dead, and all the money in the world, all the Bitcoin in the world is not going to save you. Do you have, like, what operations do you really need to carry out? And do you have the skills, abilities, tools, knowledge, resources to get it done? I love that one. It doesn't address at all like your question of like, but what about, relationships and happiness and the, sort of the deathbed postmortem of your life. And You know, I don't know if we need a different word or a modifier for wealth. You know, you could have social wealth. You can have, political wealth. This is like social, but not social, but transactional almost. Like,
how does it manifest in your life, Eric? I mean, to get a little bit personal on that, it's so interesting because what you said, the process of writing this book has been a challenging one in the sense of just internalizing these things as habits for yourself. And so how, on the wealth front, how do you think about your pursuits and your operational capacity there?
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting phenomenon around this book where Naval says in it a number of times, like, you know, if you do these things, you'll get rich, and then you'll realize that's not what you were really working for. Or, you know, people work for decades to get rich and then realize that's not what they wanted. And then they spend another few decades chasing happiness and realize that they didn't need to get rich in the first place. And like, then I see all the metrics for the book, right? And so I see how many people stop reading after the first half, or listen to the first half of the podcast, or read the first chapters over and over and over again. How many more highlights there are in the first half of the book, the wealth part, than the happiness part. And I think it's like, that's so revealing. And I'm not immune to that, right? Like, I spend so much more time, every interview I do, we spend more time talking about the wealth parts. I spend more time literally working, certainly, than I do like meditating or being present or, you know, gratitude, or on any of the things that I know mechanically will like create a better subjective experience for me. And I think it's just really, it takes a lot of reps to get to a place where you are so socially, you are no longer really motivated primarily by, you know, your ego or the perception or the goals that you have, or you've conquered that ability to create new desires in yourself to the point where you are literally just happy sitting there doing nothing in a room by yourself, being happy. You know, I have those moments, and I try to work on having more of them and enjoying, you know, a sunrise and a cup of coffee and a walk in the woods. But like, it's, you know, I'm not a black belt in that yet, but I'm aware that I'm not, and I'm trying to take some steps.
That's awesome, man.
And I don't know if maybe I pulled this from, I mean, the way I originally found your book was Senra's podcast on it, but I don't know if this was his observation or if this is something that you wrote, but I think it was, you want to optimize for being in control of your time. And I think that's such a big one. I think, you know, the people think the material things are the, you know, the results of the wealth, and there's a piece of that, but I think like being in control of the time and choosing how you want to handle that, and that's huge.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can be really happy while working on stuff, and that's, at least for me, like, I think something close to the ideal. But to do that, you've really got to control, your time, your environment. You've got to set clear boundaries. You got to know, you know, you've got to be able to envision that goal and work towards it. You know, Sam Zell is like a great example of this. I think he's one of the ones who's like optimized for freedom, optimized for time. He never stopped working, and he was always working on crazy stuff, but he loved it and he was excited about it, and he did it until he died. And, you know, he didn't have I think it took him a few shots to like get his marriage and family life right. And maybe he never did. And you can't, you know, fix some of that stuff when you go astray along the way. I think David is a really personally a great mix of like, he's an absolute execution maniac, and he works his face off. And anybody who knows him would say he's like an intense, as hardworking as anybody, you know, short of Elon Musk, but his family and his kids are always, you know, well cared for, and he's around, and he's orchestrated his life to both be intense and hardworking and high performing, and still be around his family a lot, and, you know, not make a permanent trade-off there. So,
yeah. I think one of the takeaways, I think you sent this out after the Founders Only event, but one comment that he made that stood out to me was, you know, mute the world and build your own. And I think it's such a like poignant comment. And I think, you know, again, dad of 3 kids, and it's so easy to get caught up in like a million things. It's like, you know what? Okay, there's a time and a place to observe the outside and be aware. But I think at the same time, it's like, let's put heads down, compound, all those key principles. Like it's pretty simple at the end of the day.
Yeah. I'm sure you guys know people who like, they're so effective at their job and they seem so happy, and you just kind of like, they have almost a different aura around them. And you start asking questions and you realize they're just like hilariously, blissfully unaware of anything that's happening in the world outside of like their job, their family, their local community. They're like, who's Fergie? Like, what's going on in Gaza again? Like, it's just,
That's good.
They're almost glowing. They have like, it was like almost superhuman like level of peace about them because they're just not in this constant crazy clamoring flow of information that's extraneous
Surreal.
to the real core of living a good life.
You have such an appreciation for the content of the book, Eric, but it's also interesting to you're synthesizing that of someone we all have a ton of respect for, Naval. Are there non-obvious challenges that you've experienced just in writing a book that is the synthesizing somebody else's wisdom? Like, I really appreciate the care you have for it, and it seems like you've just put a lot of yourself into that book, but ultimately it was somebody else's words. Has that been a challenge for you as you think, like, as you continue to promote it and talk about it on podcasts and elsewhere?
No, I think it's a real gift. Like I really thrive when I get to like shine a light on others' brilliance, I think. And I really enjoy being sort of a curator and an evangelist and like a hype man for ideas that I think are important and useful.
That's cool.
And I don't think there's a man, woman, or child on earth who can't get something useful out of this book. And I don't even know that I agree with every single thing that's in there. And there's a level of responsibility and care of like how much control, like how do I select the ideas that go in there? They're not just the ones that I agree with. I'm not trying to represent all of Naval. I'm not trying to represent Naval exclusively and through my lens. If any one of us, sat down to write a book about Naval, we'd all write a little bit of a different book, even if we use the same methodology, just because we make different decisions along the way. And I think that's great. The only like twinge of discomfort I have is when people quote me referencing a Naval idea, or like when they're like, "This is Eric," and I'm like, "No, that's Naval." Like I have I do not want there to be any like stolen valor here. I want to be like, I want to just sort of direct attention where I feel good about directing it and where I think it belongs and where I think people can find utility, and just be useful to the reader. That's this whole thing is like rescuing what I think is really valuable information, knowledge, wisdom, well-articulated ideas, pulling them out of this like hidden dustbin of like Twitter history or podcasts. It's like unsearchable, undiscoverable. A lot of people don't do them, and putting them in this like timeless format where it could live for, hundreds or thousands of years and be accessible to people in dozens of languages all around the world.
That's awesome, man. There's there's a powerful dose of humility in there, and not needing the attention, not needing the recognition, but just wanting others to benefit from the wisdom and goodness of those around us. So I really appreciate that perspective.
Well, I mean, it's easy to be humble when you're surrounded by geniuses,
Yeah.
Like
Make yourself the dumbest guy in the room.
I have no urge to insert myself into this book. I think, Naval is just such a gifted distiller and compressor, and like how he creates these ideas. And you see the same thing in people who write books about, or compilations even of like Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, is like the books about them are much less good than the books of them, where the author just gets out of the way and puts the best of those geniuses into form and just lets the world access those ideas in a little bit different way. That is a format that they like to consume. And it was really one of the big inspirations for this book. And I think why the format works, I'm working on one on Elon Musk now. That'll be the same format as in the Almanack, that I think
sneak peek.
There's, love him or hate him, there's so much to learn from him.
Oh yeah.
100%. For sure.
He's just an outlier of outlier. I mean, he's out there running 1 minute miles 3 at a time. Well, fucking unbelievable. Like, for as highly rated as he is, he's still underrated.
It's wild. Someone just produced a long, I guess biopic might be the right word. I'm blanking on the author's name. Did you read that one, Eric?
Is it Ashley Vance?
Yes.
Yeah. So he did the first biography of Elon Musk, and I think he wrote one of the early SpaceX books. Maybe I'm getting that wrong. There's a few people who've written great. Eric Berger wrote a great one on early SpaceX. It's just, it's right. The Walter Isaacson biography is really good.
That's
all
cool,
different
man.
Goals, different missions. Yeah. But I think if we can pull out the lessons, the most useful learnings from Elon Musk and distribute them over this next generation of entrepreneurs, we are going to have an incredible golden age. And that's, that's part of my motivation for doing it.
Eric, one of the kind of the topics and ideas that I've been digging into a little bit more, what I'm reading right now is kind of the mindfulness and attention side of things. And I think when you're, a lot of these high performers, yourself included, but how do you manage like that whole side of things? I think there's a lot of things competing for our attention. And I think, it's like, how do I do deep work while keeping attention on the right things? And again, it goes back to kind of some of our earlier comments, but are there things that you find yourself gravitating towards that have been successful to achieve that?
Oh,
dude, I am terrible at this and I should be asking you guys for tips. Like, please, I'm probably a 2.5 out of 10 at that particular skill. Like, if you guys are above that, please teach me.
I don't know that I can say that, but I'm working on it. Let's just say that. Maybe marketing.
I try like hell to do the high leverage work. But it's hard. And opportunity compounds just like anything else. And it's really hard to neglect or ignore or archive an email that you would have been over the moon to get, 2 years ago. That's the nature of compounding, man. But it's fucking brutal.
True.
And it adds up the open loops in your head and you start to feel like you can't possibly, do enough or capitalize on all these opportunities. And, it's, I think the loops model is probably helpful. Like I'm relatively new to that idea, but like the psychology behind open loops and closed loops is really powerful. And I've started to notice that when I have a lot of habits that open loops. I check Slack, I check email, I check text, I check this, I check Twitter. And then I've got a to-do list implicitly of 15 things in my head of like, oh, I got to answer that email. I got to answer that. And I should probably, the right filter is just to learn habits that do not even allow you to open the loops. It's just focus, start with a clean desk, close your eyes and determine the most important thing to get done and go get it done before you allow anything else in your head, which is so much easier said than done because we're chasing that dopamine. But
we are.
So I'm not good at it yet, but working.
Yeah. The only thing I would add is just I've created a habit in the mornings and I do it only probably 60% of the time, but just exactly to that point, Eric, of like sitting down before everything gets started and what are the key priorities? Like what are the 3 things that have to get done today?
Yeah.
And I'm overwhelmed by the idea that when we try to get 10 things done, we'll probably accomplish nothing. And if you focus on 2 to 3, you might get 1. And so I've tried to limit and focus on the really top priorities and then jot those down before the dopamine kicks in. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that.
Yeah. And I don't know about you guys. Like I'm okay in theory with letting the small fires burn. Like I know that that's a trait that you need to have.
So hard.
But I care so much about like my relationships with the people who are dealing with those fires that I still have a very strong urge to like be present with people who are dealing with things, on anywhere on my team or in my life. And it's really easy to let a day fly by when you're driven by the relationships and just being present with people, which I think is still a good and important thing to do. But building that callus of like, you just gotta let people deal with stuff and catch up later while you get the one thing that you need to get done is probably an underrated skill.
Yeah.
Peter Thiel has a great thing. I was like, why are all of the outlier successful people, like not all, but like why are so many of them on the spectrum? Like what does it say about our society that these are the people that have outlier results? And famously like poor relationships and they're lauded as bad managers and, uncaring or uncouth. And like, I think there's a lot of ways to win and a lot of personalities that can win in a lot of different ways. And running a small business is very different than trying to build Tesla with your life savings on the line. But I do think there's probably a skill in like a polite separation that would benefit me to learn to cultivate, or just having some shorthand for, I care about you deeply. I'm so sorry you're dealing with that. I have to focus on this, and then I will come back and be with you, and I wish you luck. I haven't figured out how to do that in a loving way yet, but seeking answers there too.
That comment around the spectrum, neurodivergence, which is, the new way of describing it, is fascinating. And you're in the investing world as well, Eric. I've had founders start to share more and more often as they're seeking investment about their neurodivergence, which is really interesting, because I think all of a sudden we're seeing folks realize there's an element of it that's like a superpower in this world where focus and attention is lacking. That's what many of them are so good at, is like their brain just dial in a different way than many of us. It's really a fascinating topic to explore.
Yeah, I think there's there's openness about it, which I think is good. There's definitely like the focus is a superpower. Absolutely. I think there's also like the reverse, the obvious trend when you see the really successful people self-identify as, neurodivergent or on the spectrum, is like emulating that behavior almost, and like identifying with it, and just presenting to investors as fitting that pattern, because most investors are pattern matching. And so I've heard people present themselves as like fashionably autistic, which I think is just an incredibly revealing phrase.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, it makes me uncomfortable, man.
Very Silicon Valley is a very Silicon Valley.
Very Valley, yes.
Yeah.
But I have to come back to a quote from the book, which I think is what we're circling around here. A calm mind, a fit body, and a house full of love must be earned. And I think that's what it's this process of trying to be focused and disciplined and being calm in the mind and being fit, right? That there's nothing but earning that. And I think that last piece is so powerful, like a house full of love. Yeah,
That's right. There we go.
Man, there's just like, that encompasses so much of what I think I've taken away from the Almanack. And I'm like, and I have this tendency, and maybe the both of you have experienced it as well, of like assuming home is going to just be okay. Right. I've got so many goals to get to the gym and get fit. I got so many goals at work, and like, oh, my wife and my 3 kids will be fine. And there's nothing further from the truth. Right. And it's a reordering of priorities, a reordering of loves, quite frankly, to make sure that we're putting the same level of intentionality into our relationship with our spouses or with our kids than we are into the awesome businesses that we get to build.
Yeah. I think it gets back to your question on the wealth side of things, like how do you define wealth? And it is any too narrow definition or too narrow set of goals is going to entirely neglect absolutely fundamentally critical areas of your life. And there's entropy in every direction, right? So you do have to, and I love that quote, because Naval gets a lot of credit for being sharing principles on wealth, and as he should. But that's really the master quote, right? Is like calm mind, fit body, and a house full of love. And I think he says specifically, cannot be bought. They can only be earned, and they're not earned in a monetary sense. And money doesn't really help that much actually in the scheme of things. Because I know a lot of rich people with none of those 3 things, and you can't buy it. So it's really a balance. And, the people that I've admired throughout my life, and I'm sure it's the same for you guys, find a way to make that balance. And it tends to come back to doing only the highest leverage things. It comes back to having a mastery over, yourself, and understanding where to invest your time and your energy, so that, investing your time in creating the energy and the health and the relationships and, the mindset, so that you can do all the other things that you want to do. Klaus Kleinfeld just published a book with us. He's a Fortune 500. He's a CEO of 2 different Fortune 500 companies, internationally traveling, while, wife, 2 daughters at home, maintaining a great relationship, started from nothing, like East German born into communism, like very, very interesting guy. He just published a book with us at Scribe called Leading to Thrive. And it's, he's got the whole first half of the book is the inner game, and the whole second half of the book is the outer game. He's like, 2 years ago, I wouldn't have thought I'd ever write a book, but this is his way of giving back to leaders in the community. He's like, the average CEO tenure is like 2 years. It's people are just burning out. they don't have this sense of the fundamentals, and they think that the answer is to double down on the outer game. And you can't keep doubling down on the outer game if you don't have mastery over the inner game. So the whole first thing, some of it is like so simple. And so he's like, take probiotics, learn this 7-minute workout and never let a day go by that you don't have some form of workout. Learn to cultivate your own energy, learn to infuse what you're doing with purpose for yourself and those around you so that you can have a positive mental attitude about your work, because you get X amount more energy and X amount more done. And like, there's just so many fundamentals that we don't learn. And it feels weird to go back and learn at some point. There's like an aversion to it almost. It feels too, but the pros always practice the fundamentals, and that's
good.
If you're not advancing, it's probably like a bottleneck at a more fundamental level. You see that with the Naval principles too, right? Like there's a lot of people working extremely hard on their business, and because of some fundamental decision in that business, it's never going to exceed a certain amount. Maybe there's no leverage in the business model. Maybe they never took any accountability. Maybe they don't have equity in the business. Maybe they spend their whole life like on a treadmill instead of making progress because there's a principle at the very foundation that's not in place. And if they don't recognize it, go back and fix it, even if it means, stopping walking on the treadmill, which feels awful. But if you fix it, and you get on the right track and you actually start compounding the right stuff, that can be time very well spent.
It's well said. Eric, there's this other idea that I wanted to get your thoughts on. I think it was James Clear who said it. I was listening to something recently, and he said, really kind of the ultimate form of mental toughness, resilience, is the ability to deal with uncertainty. And it's like, there's tons of people that will try to, optimize to handle this or that scenario, and okay, I'm going to prepare for this. But I think at the end of the day, it's like you get to a certain level, like we're talking about, and there's just constant uncertainty where there's no amount of preparation can really get you to the point of being able to deal with it. So I'd love to get your thoughts on how do you, there's a lot of uncertainty in your world, there's uncertainty in our worlds. And how do you deal with that well? Weigh in too, Mark, if you have thoughts, because I'm kind of wrestling with this thought, trying to be good at it.
I just chill. I don't know. Trust the process, man.
That's right.
It's the nature of both like compounding and optionality and a portfolio effect. Like you gotta, if you have the fundamentals right and you have the principles in place, you don't need to know which hand you're going to win or which ball you're going to hit to know that like, I've got a great swing. I've got a great batting average. I'm playing this game the right way. I don't know when the paydays are going to come. It's probably going to be random and unpredictable, but I have confidence in the way I'm playing this game and in my judgment, and it'll come. I think you can't survive in the startup world for very long without a tolerance for ambiguity. Maybe anywhere in the business world, honestly, but startups in particular.
Yeah, for sure.
You're definitely like charging at windmills, and you need to. Yeah, I remember being told very specifically that there were people who like were excellent performers and brilliant people and hard workers who just couldn't hack it in a company because they couldn't tolerate the ambiguity, and it just drove them crazy. And they needed to know, when they were getting a raise and what the results were going to be and if we were going to close this next round. And like, it would just eat them up inside to not know. And I'm just like, no, I'm just going to keep working and we'll see what happens. Which, can be perceived as like dumb and naive and aloof, but like there's situations where you can't think about necessarily like exactly, you can't pin it down, and you can't be dependent on knowing when it gets pinned down. You just have to keep walking through the fog, and you'll find it when you find it.
I could not agree more. And I was talking to somebody the other day who's later in life, and his spouse is dealing with a cancer diagnosis, and it's going to be a couple-year battle at least. And he made this really interesting comment, which was just every year that goes by, it's so easy in that moment to say, I wish these 2 years would just be over. But when you're 60, 65, 70 years old, like that's a 10th, that's a 20, that's 20% of your remaining life.
Yeah.
And so his whole point, and Ryan, you quote this all the time, obstacle is the way. The people who can sit in those moments and actually say, like, this is growth, this is an opportunity, doesn't mean I have to be like, it's not necessarily happiness, but I think the word is joy. It's finding joy in those moments because you're seeing the world through a different lens. And I think it comes back to where you started, Eric, which is patience versus impatience. I think the people we see who can find joy in those ambiguous moments, they're the ones who can then choose to be patient, choose to allow compounding to take its toll in a good way.
Yeah.
As opposed to, there's people who are going to be in those moments and say, I can't take it. I hate this. I need to get out. I'm going to take action on an impatient basis. And that leads to disaster. It leads to destruction.
Yeah.
So it's so easy to come out of our mouth and say, I just enjoy it. But if you really can like settle in and say, this is the ride. I was a runner, right? Like I ran, and the 10K on the track is like the personification of this. I remember my coach, it's 25 times around the track and you're running pretty fast. And my coach is like, just try to enjoy it. And I laughed at him, and I don't know if I fully understand what he meant. Exactly. I was like, Coach, that's insanity. But if you can just sit in and enjoy the ride, man, and then pick your moment to make your move, that's when success is sowed.
Yeah, there's even when you can't find joy, I think finding presence is helpful. Some of those like real, like heart-wrenching moments. The best stories, our favorite books, our favorite movies aren't nonstop joy fests. They're highs and lows, and the ability to feel both and come to a deeper understanding or appreciation of like ourselves and those around us. And, when you get into tough health situations in the family, like even really sad moments can be poignant, can be memorable, you can be really present and really involved in those, even though they're sad. The other model that I really like in this that was, somebody told me early in the startup journey that helped me to create this sort of tolerance of ambiguity is the Stockdale Paradox. Have you guys heard of this?
No, love this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like, I think it came from, I think it was James Stockdale. He's like a prisoner of war, and he's like, I know with absolute certainty that I will get out of here. Like, this will be over. I do not know when. It's not going to be today. It might be tomorrow, probably not, but it will be over someday. And all I have to do is stay alive, essentially, and not give up. And that's a very helpful, frame to just like most days, this is the way I think about podcasting or a business or investing, anything, like looking back at your progress over the next 10 years. You won't remember what you did today or this week. The only thing that will matter about this day in 10 years is that you didn't quit. So like, if you just keep stringing together days of not quitting and keep showing up, like you will become a professional, you will keep making progress. Even if you didn't literally make progress that day, even if you moved backwards that day, but you didn't quit, like just keep the streak alive.
So good.
I just want to double click into the Stockdale because I do love it. I think I read it in Jim Collins' book. I think
I'm looking at it right here. I have the screenshot.
Yeah,
it's like from it's great, good to great. It's
but the
so
thing,
good.
I just think so many people need to hear this part of it is I think one of the observations was that the prisoners who died were the ones who were actually overly optimistic. It was a misalignment of expectations because they were like, no, the allies are going to come get us and it's only going to be another week. And then the week comes and it goes and they're not there. And those are the ones who didn't make it. There's a lot of power in that. And just being realistic about expectations, anything that goes, I mean, even in our relationships, if you have misaligned expectations of what someone is or isn't going to do, that's when conflict occurs. So I think it really speaks, I love that, Eric, and I think it speaks to setting proper expectations.
And it's so hard you can have expectations set in you so subtly that you don't even notice they get in there. I feel like that's, the root of so many of these disagreements with, partners or business partners or kids, or like you both suddenly realize that you both had a totally different assumed understanding of what the other was going to do or what the situation was going to be or, whatever. And all of a sudden you're like, neither of your expectations are met or they're at odds. And like neither of you ever intentionally set those expectations. It's just
so good.
Weird.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
How did we get here? Exactly.
It's so good.
Exactly. Well, and it's if you can just enjoy the process, as opposed to saying if I'm going to start this business, I have to make $1 million next year. If you can just be like, I'm going to start the business because it seems challenging and I like a good challenge, man, you are immediately at a competitive advantage.
And the safe way to do that is just do things for their own sake. You know,
Yes.
when I did not write this book to sell 1 million copies. I thought it would sell 1,000 copies. My wildest dream was to break even. I wanted to spend this time with them all. I wanted to
That's awesome.
clone this book. I wanted to install the ideas in my head, and I wanted to preserve the knowledge. Like I had no idea what I was. I'm still daily gobsmacked that yoga teachers in Bali are reading this book, and that, you know, it's translated into 40 languages. I'm still shocked.
That's so cool, man. That's so cool. That's awesome.
I'm just excited to like do the work. And, you know, if you start a business that you're in love with, or you serve customers that you're in love with, or you create products that you're in love with, and you don't actually care if you make money, this is another paradox. Like the richest people, the entrepreneurs throughout history who have exceeded are almost never just chasing money or doing a returns optimized calculation. Like in writing this Elon book, everything that he does has a large civilizational mission behind it. He's trying to solve the very biggest problems. He attracts the greatest talent, and he fights like hell to keep these things alive. He doesn't give a shit about the money. He has bet his whole life savings 3 or 4 times and just keeps putting it on the table to try to solve these problems. Like, people don't realize not only did he start SpaceX and Tesla, Tesla's a little muddier, but like he also personally basically did the pre-seed and the seed and the Series A and the Series B for both of those companies with all of his own money. He's $100 million into each of those before they became the things that they became. And he only could do that because he didn't give a shit about making the money, didn't care about the returns, was just trying to solve the mission. And, you know, we're not all Elon Musk. We're not all going to make life interplanetary. Totally fine. But if you start a business with the like only express goal of like, I've got to make $250,000 this year and this is the way to do it, like you are the prisoner who dies in the Stockdale Paradox.
Yes.
And you're very likely to end up unhappy. And if you just start doing something that you love for people that you love, you don't care when the rewards come, you're just going to keep at it, you will become something really unique and something really powerful. And the rewards will come because you'll have created, back to the Navalisms, right? Like some very special knowledge, and you'll figure out how to create something for society that they have not gotten anywhere else, because you'll be following your own unique passions and interests in a way that's like authentic to you. So be happy throughout the journey, and you'll be shocked at the rewards.
I think it was Jim. I don't know if it's Jim Collins. It's his language, but it says retain absolute faith that you can and will prevail in the end, regardless of difficulties. At the same time, confront the most brutal facts of the current reality, whatever that might be. It's like, okay, that's it.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, we're done
There
with
you
books.
go.
That's it. Okay, we're done.
I think that's a wrap, folks. Yeah, that's it. No, I have one last question, and then we can wrap. We've talked a lot about the Almanack. Next book on the list for you, Eric. If someone's read the Almanack, they want to go deeper on whether it's confronting the realities of existence or mindfulness, where do we go? What's on the list for you these days?
I think if you want to go backwards through almanacs, read Poor Charlie's Almanack if you haven't already. It's a truly incredible book, influenced me greatly. If you want to go deeper into technology, I think Where's My Flying Car is an incredible book. The book that Naval is recommending like the most right now, emphatically, is The Beginning of Infinity, which I think is an incredible book. It's like technological and philosophical. I think it will in time be one of the kind of the great books in the Western canon from our age. Like, I think it's a natural follow on from Popper. I think civilization is headed in an incredible direction if we can permeate these ideas and share that as broadly as possible. So I think The Beginning of Infinity is, if I could leave you with one book to follow on with, like, please pick that one up, take it seriously. There's great podcasts. The TOK cast, Talkcast, Theory of Knowledge, is a breakdown of that book. You can find a bunch of interviews with David Deutsch, the author. Naval did a series with David Deutsch. They'll give you a sense of the ideas in there and kind of bring you along, because some of them are It's a very comprehensive philosophical book that covers a ton of different fields, which makes it really interesting, but it's also like a little bit of work, but it is a life-changing sort of like lens to adopt. And so I encourage people to, take a look at that, do that work.
Love it, man.
That's awesome.
Love
Leading
it.
to Thrive too. That sounds like an awesome one.
Klaus Kleinfeld is a great guy, and that's a great book that just came out. I think if you liked the Almanack of Naval, you will very much enjoy. There's a little bit more tactical business knowledge in there. I mean, this guy, like, I was shocked at how, back to the fundamentals, like how simple the playbook is that he's implementing at Fortune 500 companies and having incredible results. Like, it's some of the same stuff at a high level, the principles that you would hear from a relatively a normal business coach, but he's implementing them at Fortune 500 companies, and you're like,
at scale.
Wow.
And that's hard. It's hard to do.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
It's hard to do, but if you do it well, yeah, man, that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Was
give me a
sorry,
ton
last
of
question.
ideas.
Beginning of Infinity, was that a Scribe published book? I don't think it was it?
No.
Okay,
No.
I wish.
I wish next time, maybe
Deutsch
Deutsch is
one
next
day,
time. We'll see.
next time is right.
We are working on a adjacent project, I will say. That should be out in January.
Okay. We'll stay tuned.
Keep an eye on it. Stay tuned.
Well, a lot of really good nuggets here. Eric, thanks for carving out time with us. I know people are going to find value in these insights and your story, and a lot of really good stuff.
Thanks for letting me rant. This is quite fun. Appreciate you guys.
Yeah.
Appreciate
Thanks,
you, man.
Eric. Appreciate
Thanks
it,
for being here.
Thanks for engaging with this episode of the Masters of Resilience podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with a friend or colleague. Stay up to date on all the latest episodes and get exclusive resources at mastersofresilience.com. We'll see you next time.